As the daughter of my next door neighbor growing up would say, well, I'm just so proud to be here. Minnie Pearl's mom lived next door to the funeral home, so we grew up with Minnie Pearl when she came to check on her mom. And those words have always proven true. I think for most of us who are in any kind of a ministry, there are those moments and times in our lives when we're just so proud to be here. Some of those we would rather be anywhere else in the world but right there, just because of the pressure, just because of the bearing of sorrow and heartache that we feel because of what's there. I have just found out this morning that one of my kids that grew up in the youth group had a really difficult early childhood and was adopted and has lost his mom and dad, was apparently severely injured in a traffic accident 3 nights ago, and no one knew it. He had a wallet in his pocket, and they went through everything in the wallet and could not find out anything about him. And then finally, the place where he worked reopened, and they called them. And so those kind of things are things that you all will deal with on a regular basis. I grew up in the most fabulous place in the world you could grow up, and it's not Centerville, Tennessee. It's McDonald Funeral Home in Centerville, Tennessee. And some of these guys have been down over and over on sharpening the sword when you are where they bring the youth group down there and sleep in the chapel of the funeral home. And then we would work out from there and kind of what we were doing, the games we were playing, but also the seriousness of the stuff that we talked about to those young men who were wanting and hoping and thinking about becoming an active minister, whether it's for hire or whether it's just for a life's purpose. So Centerville is a great place to grow up in. And the Centerville Church, Paul Rogers, for all the years that Paul was there, I'll never forget when Paul baptized me. He baptized me, and he baptized me, and when he got through, he looked at me and he said, Bill, you never know, we might make a preacher out of you. And I literally laughed out loud as a 14-year-old. I thought that was quite hilarious. That was a long time ago and a lot of sermons ago, and I'm just glad to be with you today. I'm glad because there are a lot of times in a minister's life that are difficult. Do you think you function better in a situation you've been in before or one that you've never been in when you go to be with a family? Which one is the easiest for you? Never been there or been there before? Been there before. So if you've never buried a mother or father, a brother, sister, a son or daughter, a wife or child, then you're going to have to deal with that cold turkey. You're not going to be in a situation where you know what that experience is really like. And one of the things that is most precious to me is having had the experience at 16 to lose a 13-year-old brother in the apartment with you at the same time getting ready to go fishing. And we go to the den, my younger brother and I go to the den to watch TV, which was above the funeral home. And my father comes up having put the chapel in order so that they could have a service there. We use it for visitation, and then we set up chairs every time. I have set up 1,487,222 chairs downstairs in the funeral home because we put them up and take them down every time we had a service. So I say all of that just to say that my dad came up the steps, went in to get Ken up so we could eat breakfast and go fishing, and found Ken had died. He had had a heart murmur and difficulty and a problem, but that moment in time turned our family upside down. And what I do in this field is a direct growth process from that experience. Having felt so incredibly lost and without answer and so angry at the God who created us, I just that has been for me a major, major, major help. So what I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to share very quickly because, like you already know, I have a service at 1 o'clock that I have to speak to, and good, I've got about 30 minutes before I have to take off. I wish I had about 4 hours, and I will tell you all this. If there's any interest at some point in time to have a gathering of ministers and go through everything that I would like to share with you today, we'll need about 7 hours. And I could probably even put you up at the lodge at Camp Maribah, probably for nothing. And I would be delighted to do that. And I'd cook breakfast and I'd cook supper for you. Not doing lunch, it'd be sandwiches. But the other two I would handle. You spend the night, have a good time, bring your side by side fishing pole, and have a nice night together. But anyway, this is a passion for me, and it is a passion just for the fact that I grew up in a funeral home. I own the funeral home. I worked for over 40 years in the funeral home with people that I've known basically all my life. So I want to share some things with you today. On the morning of 9/11, I was coming out of a board of directors meeting at the bank, First National Bank in Centerville, and I was coming down the stairs and I met Robert Bowman, one of the vice presidents, and Robert looked at me and he said, "Don't ask any questions, go home, turn the television on now." So I walked out the door of the bank, across the alley into my house. The funeral home was right there, and I went in and turned the TV on. I was headed that morning for Mars Hill Bible School in Florence, Alabama, to do a lecture that morning, making fun of some of their teachers and congratulating them on an incredible year they'd had. It's just like their athletic year this year has been state champion football. The girls looks like going to whomp out the state championship in women's basketball for their category. Just an awesome group of folks. David Williams, a very close friend of mine from down there. And that's where I'm headed. And I was so, when I got up that morning, charged up to be able to just fire these kids up and tell them how proud everyone of them was. They're National History Bowl winners that year, all these kind of things. And I turn on the TV just as the second plane hits the tower. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, surely they're going to call me and tell me not to come. But they didn't. And so I head down Natchez Trace Parkway toward Florence. What am I going to say to these kids who don't even realize how terribly their lives have changed? And what a difference this is going to be in the way we look at everything. And I don't believe in miracles, but I believe sometimes you get help when you least expect it, in ways you least expect it. And I reach over and I pick up my Bible and I lay it up on the thing, and I've just said, "Lord, help me know what to say to these kids today, because their lives have changed. Help me to see where we are. I just need something out of your word that'll help me." And I just opened it up, literally, and laid it on the steering wheel, slowed down to 45 miles an hour, hit the cruise control button, and I looked down and I started reading these words. "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in this day of my trouble. Incline your ear to me in the day that I call. Answer me now. For my days are consumed like smoke. My bones are burned like a hearth. My heart is stricken and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread. Because of the sound of my groaning, my bones cling to my skin. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. I lie awake and am like a sparrow alone on the housetop. My enemies reproach me all day long, and those who deride me swear an oath against me. For I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. Because of your indignation and your wrath, for you have lifted me up and cast me away. My days are like a shadow that lengthens, and I wither like grass. But you, O Lord, shall endure forever, and the remembrance of your name to all generations. You will arise and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her. Yes, the set time has come. Those words burst me into tears, and I had to really slow down and get my head back in the picture of what's going on. What I want you to think about today, if you remember those moments, is what you felt when you saw all of that. That moment in which you realized that we're not as safe as we thought we were. That thousands of people died. And all I could think about was the fact that my son, who was working for Deutsche Bank at the time in Nashville, was to be on a plane the day before, arriving in Nashville, and Deutsche Bank's got offices up in the second tower that went down and has their own building just off to the right. And I had not talked to him that morning and could not get him on the phone. And so through all of that, the earth underneath me just shifted to a place I'd never been in before. But I went down and shared those verses with those kids and just tried to explain to them not to be afraid of the emotions they feel. And some of them, it just flew over like a dove in the morning because it just didn't have the ability to grasp it. But what I want you all to think about is that happens every day that you ministry. Every day of your life, somewhere, somebody needs somebody who understands. Who doesn't understand because they think they understand, but who understands enough to know that they can't understand what it is like for them personally to go through that loss. I know what it's like to lose a 13-year-old brother suddenly on the morning you're getting ready to go fishing. Beautiful summer morning. And I know what it's like to sit with a father whose dementia came the last 2 years of his life. And yet we had to deal with that. I know what it's like to bury a mom who had pancreatic cancer that we dealt with on a day-to-day basis for 7 months. I know what it's like to have a brother who committed a crime, transporting drugs, and spends 8 years, which was the longest sentence of 5 that he accumulated over his years. 8 years in prison in Arkansas, far enough away you could run see him on the weekend. All of those things are incredibly grief related. And in your life and in my life, we're going to live with grief, especially because we have chosen to inject ourselves in the midst of the trauma of life as ministers of the instrument of peace of God's love. It's heavy what you're going to be called to do. Very heavy. And the most important thing about the whole thing is that you understand that you don't understand. If you don't get anything else that I say today, get that. Understand that you don't understand, because every loss that comes into the life of a family is different for every person in that family. It is going to move and shake and quiver and quake in different ways for everyone that has been exposed to the trauma of loss. I don't care if you've sat there 7 months like I did with Mom. That moment is still a moment to absorb. I don't have a mom anymore. And that's been 12 years ago now. Grown man, but I don't have a mom anymore. But thankfully for me, and I will tell you this story, Mom on a Tuesday basically lost consciousness. We continued giving her her meds. Wednesday and no response, Thursday and no response, Friday and no response. Sitting there eating supper, mom in the bed, my wife sitting at the foot of the bed, knowing that we're approaching the departure hour. The telephone rings, and I answer the telephone, and I said, hello. And my incarcerated brother in Arkansas was calling because at 6 o'clock every Friday, the Department of, how am I going to put it, prisons in Arkansas sets up a time each week that every guy gets 15 minutes worth of the phone. Don't have to pay for it. They get 15 minutes. Friday night at 6 o'clock was when Bob had called for the last 8 years. And the phone rings, and I answer it, and I hadn't even thought of that. And then I hear him on the other end, and I said, well, hello, Pooter. That was a very nickname that we had, because we were both very good at Putin when we were kids. And we were always trying to see who could do it the loudest, and Mother called us one day, so she has always called us her little Pooters. But anyway, I said, well, hello, Pooter. And Joyce, my wife, said, who are you calling Pooter? I said, that's what I always call Bob. And I hear my mother's bed move, and I look, and my mother is up on her elbow. And she looks at me, and she says, are you talking to my Bob? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. Would you like to speak to him? And she said, of course I would. So I handed my mother the telephone, clear as a bell. For the next 9.5 minutes, my mother talked to my brother. Told him everything he needed to hear. She told him, I think you're going to be all right this time. I've read your letters. They're not the same. You're not angry and mad at anybody. You've accepted the fault. And I think you're going to be okay this time when you get out. 9.5 minutes, the buzz goes off. She said, no, or 9 minutes, the buzz goes off. She said, I've got 30 seconds to talk to you, and don't you interrupt me. And she told me how much, I heard her tell him how much she loved him, how much she believed in him, how much she hoped everything would be all right, how much she had enjoyed having him at home for a few months before he got his last sentence. And then she said, now I want to let you talk to your big brother. My mother handed me the phone. I talked to him the last 30 seconds, explained to her that we're looking at hours probably and not days. And he, of course, couldn't say a word, so I hung up the phone, told him I loved him, and hung up the phone. And I turned to my mom, and I said, what about that? Hey, what about that, Mom? Mom? Right back into wherever she was. 4.5 hours later, she died. I will always believe she was waiting to talk to Bob because she knew he would call Friday evening. And well, I always think the Lord is gracious. It was one of those nights that I thought was a very incredibly gracious moment. So now, I've tried my best to give you all just a little insight that hopefully you haven't had yet. Hopefully, the death of a child, the death of a parent, I know that's not the case in a room this size. But I want our minds to get to those places in order that we can think a little bit. There's some things I want us to think about, and when we think about them, it's very important to me. I have sheets of paper in my hand that I did at Heritage University in Florence, Alabama. And I had a group of women that I had, about 20 or 22 of them, for 4 or 5 nights, 1 week during their annual lectureship. And I had 3 ministers in the room who wanted to hear what I had to say, and they were there every night. And so I asked all of them, and I set the guys in the back so the women wouldn't have to look at them, so they would go ahead and talk to me instead of hiding what they really feel, since 3 of their ministers were in the back. So I handed out a sheet of paper, and I asked a question to all of the ministers and the ladies alike. And the question I asked was this: what is grief? Very simple. What is grief? I want you to write on that sheet of paper in a paragraph or less what you know grief to be. And when I got through, I took them up and I put the ladies in one pile. I took the ministers in the other pile. And I read them. After I went through and very quickly picked out about 3 from each of the responses. Of course, I did that because there were only 3 ministers. And I picked 3 ladies to go with them. What is grief? Grief is the human reaction to a significant change, loss, or alteration of relationships between persons, between people. Grief is the emotional reaction or response to a loss in your life, the stages of emotions following a loss in one's life. Grief is the process of moving through a real or threatened loss, the emotional expression of that loss. What is grief? Grief is being overwhelmed in emotions, not knowing where to turn or what to do. It's feeling a loss, knowing that it will never be replaced. Grief is sorrow. It hurts. It makes you miserable. It makes you cry at anything or nothing. It can take control of your life. It is the loss of everything, it seems. Grief is the loss of the dearest person I ever knew. It makes the days long and the nights even longer. Which one was the minister's definition? The first 3 or the last 3? Not everybody at once. Just what do you think? I'm sorry? Why?
Not as heartfelt, not as personal.
Totally academic. This is what I think. This is what I've learned. This is what I've heard. Totally academic. It is reality, and it is well said, and the definition that they gave is very bookish. And I would expect that. What else would I expect out of those 3 ministers?
Yes, it's personal.
They had never had a personal experience, and I asked them that specifically after we were over. And in front of those ladies, I said, how many of you think your minister had a difficult time identifying with you and where you were at that moment in time? Don't raise your hands, ladies, because I know these ministers are your ministers. Because it's true. How can you and I understand what it means to say goodbye to someone you've loved for 60 years, for 50 years, for 4 months, which I've had to deal with before? It's just hard for us to put ourselves in a time and a place where we are with them so we can think. So what I have done today is done nothing except help you all picture for a moment in your minds the distance sometimes we are between those we love and between our own experience. So what does that make most important out of all of this? It's not what you say. It is not what you do, but it is that you are. That you are present. That you're with them in that moment. That you're not there, and understand that you're not there to explain to them what's happened, how they ought to react, how they ought to feel, but you are there just simply to be there. I had my share of folks who explained to me why my 13-year-old brother died. But I also had Bobby Marson and John Durham, who left their work at the Tennessee Gas Transmission Plant unit there in Centerville and came to my house immediately after they heard. And I went out on the back porch when I heard somebody coming up the metal steps, and they walked through the door. Bull was my power forward when I played guard on the basketball team. Bobby was my best friend since we fought over Cynthia Johnson in the first grade, and I'm 16 years old. And just like when I was laying there on my back looking up at Bobby and saying, does she really mean this much to you? And he said, no. I said, well, let's go play. And we played until the day Bobby died of a sudden heart attack at 55 in his dental office. And completely rearranged my old years because we both went back to Central because that's where we wanted to be. And we really had talked about how much fun it was going to be growing old with each other. Even down to the point, you shoot this when my shoulder hurts too bad. Get in, Bobby. You know, those kind of things. That's what we envisioned and what we pictured. But Bobby is there and John is there. And Bobby never said anything anyway. He was the quiet one that just was there. John said, Mac. And then just both of them threw their arms around me. And the three of us together, I had not cried yet, the three of us together had a good old snot-slinging cry because they loved Ken too. But they really loved me. Do you think I will ever forget that? I was 16 years old when this happened, and I turned 73 this weekend. No, I think about it all the time. And I miss Bobby every day. It's just that simple. What I want to do is motivate you to try to find out what you can about grief and loss, because there is nothing you will do in your ministry, in my opinion, that will be much more difficult than that. It's how to be what you need to be when you need to be it, and you've never been there before. So I'm going to introduce you to two or three things, and I'm going to tell you I'm serious about, I'd love to spend 6 or 8 hours with you and go through this step by bit, by little by little. I'm going to introduce to you 2 books. Number one is a book called Tear Soup. It's an adult's book. You can tell by, get where we can see it. Now you can tell by the illustrations in it that it is an adult's book. And if I even turn to another one back in the front of it, you can tell it's an adult's book by the pictures that are in it, because all of the pictures really and truly are great at depicting what they're talking about then. But if you'll notice, that's child stuff. Even a kid looking at this book gets the idea from what the pictures are in. But everything in the book is of value. Everything in it gives you information. The good books, Grief Watch, it gives you definitions, it gives you resources, it gives you what you do if you're a male chief. What if you were if there are 2 of you cooking? In other words, a husband and a wife going to be bearing a child, so you all are doing what? You're making a pot of tear soup. And this book is incredibly valuable. And is anybody in here born in, what is this, 26? Any of you all born in the year 2000? Okay. Any of you all born in February of 2000? Any of you all born in July of 2000? March of 2000? March, April, May. I hope you all will find one of those, and if I had them, I would have brought them and given them to you, because that is a fabulous book for you to read, to put you a little more in perspective of what's going on. Uh, the other thing that I really want to hand you out, and I don't have enough, uh, but I want you to know the major task of grieving. Two other books. Let me give them. I've got to go. So I'm getting all out of whack. Number one. I want you to find a copy of it, and I want you to hang on to it. The Grief Recovery Handbook by John James and Frank Cherry, I think. It's his last name, or that was his pseudonym that he used as an author at the time. John James and Frank Cherry. You can find them. I Googled them today. They're still there. The Grief Recovery Handbook. Read it. It will help you immensely through the eyes of a father who'd lost a child, as the two of them write about grief and loss all together. And they've done national work, and I've studied with John James, spent a week with him, and he's a fabulous, fabulous instructor. So what was the other one that I was going to give you to be sure that you get? And helping you is hurting me. The Grief Recovery Handbook. And if you do funerals, you must have this. You must have it. Mine is somewhat falling apart. And you just need it. A mother's source book of inspiration. You will find poems and wonderful poetry applicable to most every service you have if you are at some point in time at a loss for words. I absolutely love this book. I use it often. I use it as I choose to use it. In other words, I may rewrite it for a man or rework it for a woman, but if I read this, I've read this poem one time, I literally have read it 1,000. There are so many things I'd like to tell you face to face. I either lack the words or fail the time or place to find the time or place. But in this special letter, Dad, you'll find, at least in part, the feeling that the passing years have left within my heart. You get the gist of that. But you can also read it. But in this special letter, Mom, you'll find, at least in part, but in this special letter, hon, you'll find you can make it's fabulous. It's fabulous. I have just entered my second version because that one is falling apart. But I'm sorry that I have to leave. I wish I could spend the rest of the day with you, but I must go get with this family